Greetings, hi, and hello everyone. My name is Jason Petitfrère. I'm a speaker, I'm a podcaster, and my life's work is centered around allowing the world to meet the true you by helping you think, speak, and eventually live better than yesterday. We do this first by establishing a good reason why, a strong and powerful motivation to keep going when the going gets rough. Second, we need awareness and acknowledgement of what's holding us back. And third, we need scalable steps forward as a reliable bridge between who we are right now and who we need to be tomorrow and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. This, my friends, is how you go from stuck to thinking as, speaking as, and living as the true you. Man, oh man, it has been a minute, has it not? I do apologize for that as far as just randomly going incognito, but I've returned with a bit of a vengeance in that I'll be dropping 3 episodes at once, trying to catch up to where I would have liked to be by this time. Basically just going to be splitting this supersode into 3 minisodes, and that's going to get us to the full 30 episodes, which I believe is a good place to turn this into a cutoff point season-wise. I'd also like to announce basically that I'm planning on going video pretty soon. Not sure when. I'm still working out the kinks of how I want to do this in such a way that it's not going to take too much energy or too much focus out of what I've got going on currently in life, which will then lessen the likelihood that I have long or inexplicable breaks sprinkled all throughout the posting cycle. And that's another thing. I'm going to have to come up with an actual posting cycle, but that's neither here nor there. Just making a quick announcement, basically, and I hope you guys look forward to, joining me and putting a face to the voice if you've never seen me before. And ideally, in the future, I get to be able to see some of your faces or hear some of your stories and your testimonies of how this content has either helped you or it's mainly maybe raised your awareness about certain things or helped validate some of the struggles you yourself have been walking through. I'd love to hear any of these sorts of life-giving stories or affirmations from you guys about your own breakthrough and your own journey, and how this podcast has in any way whatsoever helped you to not only think as, speak as, but to actually genuinely live as the true you. Now, moving right along into the topic today, or this time around, I want to talk to you about TRU Awakening. And by awakening, it's just my spin on, this time around, because I'm sure I'm going to talk about this again in some way, shape, or form, my spin on self-discovery, self-mastery even, because it's not, I'll get into that. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But I've got 4 quotes prepared for you guys this time around. Not just 3, not just 2, but 4 full quotes. And I'll be breaking each and every single one of them down with my own personal opinion of what they mean, my take on them. And then I'd like to wrap it up with some scripture just to make it a full, well-rounded thing to give you not just practicality as far as quotes from names you may or may not recognize, but also just truth from one of the only realist and truest sources of life that I know, which is the Bible, the Word of God. Whether you agree or disagree with what I say or what I read is not as relevant as whether or not you find yourself capable of even being exposed to such a thing and capable of critical thought afterwards. So just bear that in mind. This isn't me trying to convert nobody right now, But if you do, who knows? Who knows? It might be for the better. You won't know until you give it a chance. Anyway, let's jump right into quote numero uno. Quote numero un. This is a quote that goes as follows. Let me see here. I just want to make sure that I got my screen properly set up. Here we go. This is a quote by Sonia Parker. She says, "Don't spend all your time trying to find yourself. Spend your time creating yourself into a person that you'll be proud of." This quote, I really like it a lot, and I read several quotes in the process of picking each and every single one of these out. By the way, with every time I do quotes, I'm running through a whole list and Googling a bunch of different lists curated by others. But then obviously I'm curating my own. And this one stood out to me because in the point that I almost got into earlier, I'd like to read this again. Don't spend all your time trying to find yourself, because that's pretty much the craze nowadays, or for all of time. We keep thinking that our ideal selves is something or someone that we'll eventually stumble over or find at some point. And there is a partial truth to that, which I'll explain in just a moment. But the quote continues, "Spend your time creating yourself into into a person that you'll be proud of." And I find that portion as well to be partially or mostly correct. Mostly in that I would just add some slight amendments to that. Here goes. My personal opinion, not the quote or anything like that. I would personally add that self-discovery is important, but is only capitalized on through self-mastery or control, self-control. I will say that again. Self-discovery is important, but it means nothing if you don't add on to that self-mastery and self-control. And I'll clear that up by giving you some examples. What can you think of as the pros and cons to a person having the tendency of being impatient? I'll give you a quick second. Just think about it. Like, what's a good thing about being impatient? Or someone having the tendency of being impatient, not always being impatient, but someone who has a tendency of having a short fuse or being impatient. What could be a good thing that comes out of that? And then the easier question connected to that would be, what could be a bad thing coming from someone having a tendency of being impatient? I'll give you a quick couple seconds. Do 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 do. Well, that's very distracting. I'm sorry. Okay. If you need more time, feel free to pause this. But here goes. The point I'm trying to get to with asking you such a question and and the subsequent question, because it's going to be a similar one, but with a different trait, is that having the tendency to be impatient is something you discover about yourself. In your journey of self-discovery, or in quote unquote finding yourself, that's where you find out, oh man, if this is you, by the way, just let's pretend, oh man, I tend to be more of an impatient type. Like when I'm working with others, I tend to get really frustrated when I have to slow down for them to catch up, or when I have to explain things more than once. That can be your discovery as far as like a trait of yours, right? That's a part of you. That's why I say self-discovery isn't all there is to it. You can discover that you have some pretty, more negative leaning traits, because I don't think this is purely a bad thing or purely a negative trait. And that should be made obvious to you by answering the pros and cons question. The con is obviously that you have less patience typically, that you are more quick to judge probably, or that you are more harsh with people who are less capable than you in a particular area or industry or skill. Whatever it is, it can take many forms of manifestation as far as the negative side. But it can also take many forms of manifestation in the positive side. What is a pro, Jason, of someone having the tendency of being impatient? These are the types of people that you want at the helm of innovating a productivity line, for example. These are the types of people that come up with inventions like the microwave. These are the types of people that come up with inventions like the motor vehicle, as in the car, or that come up with upgrades to technology, like Alexander Graham Bell with the phone was an upgrade to snail mail. And of course, we have the cell phone now, cellular tower, cellular technology, if I'm saying that right, which was an upgrade to landlines, to hard lines. It has made the world of communication that much faster. Why is it nowadays that when a browser takes a little longer to load, you get a bit impatient, when just getting access to knowledge used to involve having to put clothes on and making a trek to a library or finding an almanac, if any of you know what that even is? But now we have almost instant access to the World Wide Web. That came from people or organizations that tended to be impatient enough in a good way. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't believe that I'm stretching too much with this example, but if you think so, then you're welcome to suggest or comment an idea that you think fits the description a little bit better. But if this matches you, by the way, I want you to not only hear my admonition and my warning, but also to take comfort in my encouragement. My warning is that the moment you discover that you tend to be more of an impatient person in any certain area, pay more attention to any time you step into that area, especially with other people. With yourself, it's important too, because we can be overly harsh or not extend enough grace to ourselves when we're being self-critical about how long we are taking. I know I'm guilty of this when it comes to self-improvement in multiple areas in my life. I get pretty harsh with how I talk to Jason, and he's been hurt by that and still is in some areas, which is something I'm working on. But what about you? What's your name? If your name is Krista, if your name is Jared, if your name is Liam or Lisa, has Liam been patient with Liam? Has Lisa been gracious with Lisa? Has Tristan been overly harsh and critical of Tristan? Like, are you examining how your impatience or your tendency towards impatience how that has negatively impacted your image of yourself? Now, are you also aware of how much further you yourself are than others, say in your same peer group or others of your same age group or whatever, because of the fact that you did not allow yourself to slack in certain areas that others did? Or because you realized very early on or early on enough that you wanted more out of life, that your desires, that your passions demanded more out of you than it did out of those next to you or ahead of you or behind you. And your desire to not be either left behind or to simply fall behind your own expectations, and feeling that serious pressure of, man, I'm not going to be young forever. That sense of impatience, if I may call it that. It's called a sense of urgency. That is a form of, impatience. It's not directly impatience, and I don't want to get into the weeds of like really, really getting granular about that. So I truly hope and pray that you get my point with this. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio of comparison and accuracy here. So bear in mind that I am kind of stretching it just a little bit just to make the point. But yeah, I'll just stop it at that and move on to my next example before we move on to quote number 2. That way, I don't lose you guys in my own mind palace, which currently is still being organized. Example number 2. What are the pros and cons of being detail-oriented? And funny enough, typically people who are detail-oriented tend to be a bit more on the impatient side, if you hadn't noticed. I'll give you a couple seconds. And if you need more time, feel free to pause now. If you don't need more time, here goes. Pros and cons of being detail-oriented. Obviously, an easy con would be you probably tend to be more of a difficult person to work with for others. Not just with yourself and in how you frustrate yourself by not being able to let something go or unsee a minute detail that isn't going to break the project, but it's just a standard that you have of yourself. And it's like you just can't sleep until you just fix that clock or, fix that hand on the clock that's just stuck in a weird spot, even though there's no batteries in it. And you just, like that may be a frustration to you. But then again, if you're like that with yourself, how are you with people that you have to work with? Are you patient with them in them not being as detail-oriented as you are? That is a potential con of being detail-oriented. Now, if you're detail-oriented and you've heard before that you're a hard person to work with or difficult or whatever, that may be correct enough for you to start introspection for the purpose of not erasing that part of you that is detail-oriented, but tempering its expression. Stay detail-oriented, guys, because if you are like that, there's a reason for it, and it is beautiful that you are that way. This world needs you. Let me say that again. Being detail-oriented is not a curse. It may feel like a burden, and I'm speaking from experience. It may often feel like a burden, but it is not a curse. So let's talk about the pros, or a pro at the very least, of being detail-oriented. Every single astronaut that has ever been to space thanks God and the stars above, if they don't believe in God, that the engineers, that the crew that have put together the spaceships or the rockets that took them to space are people who are detail-oriented. Honestly, I don't think I need to say anything else beyond that, because if they weren't, even more mistakes would happen than already have. More lives would be lost than already have been in the realm of space exploration. Another easy option, the military. If you're not grateful that the military as a whole is more detail-oriented than not, I'm not saying it's perfectly detail-oriented, because God knows that I know that it ain't perfectly detail-oriented. But if you're not grateful living in this country of the United States, if you're in the United States or any country with a military, that your military is detail-oriented enough to not implode, then you might have to reevaluate how important on your list, or how high on your list, being detail-oriented is. Because that is what creates higher levels of efficiency, greater results, magnified results. It's in the details. It's not always about this large burst of massive action. Sometimes it's the little, minute, everyday things, aka details, that really make the difference between, say, for example, an Olympian and just the neighborhood superstar. Pick your sport. It's the details. And when that person themselves is not detail-oriented, guess who they hire? Detail-oriented people. A nutritionist is just a detail-oriented person that focuses their powers on food and what you put into your body and how it fuels your body, the science and the art of nutrition. That takes detailed focus. Now, I won't continue harping on this and move on to quote number 2. I think I'll cut off the first episode here, but allow me to leave you with yet another warning, but also encouragement, because I want to make sure to bring this home 100% and make it as clear as possible. All these things that I talk about, everything that I mention, if it relates to you and it connects to you, do not fall into the trap or under the temptation of simply hearing the negatives because you're familiar with it. That is my main warning to you. Don't just hear me say that, oh, if you tend to be impatient, you're just, all those people that said you're difficult to work with, they're just right, and that's it. I'm not about to say you're not difficult to work with either. Don't get that mistaken. Maybe you actually are difficult to work with. But guess what? You're still breathing right now, aren't you? You're still thinking right now, aren't you? You still have the ability to move your hands and feet and speak words and communicate, can't you? Don't you? So that means you have an opportunity to not just change in that you eradicate that portion of yourself. I already made it clear that that's not what I'm saying. You have an opportunity to improve, an opportunity to not just sit at self-discovery, which is incomplete as far as transformation is concerned. You have an opportunity, nay, you have the duty at this point to move into the next step. As of this moment of being aware, made aware, I charge you to move into the next phase of self-mastery, self-control. Okay, so what? People have said you're difficult to work with. Maybe it's because their standards are either non-existent or too low. Maybe that's the case here. It may not always be the case. Maybe you genuinely are a bit difficult to work with and you need to work on your attitude or your communication skills. But sometimes people say that simply because they don't want to have to work as hard as you do. Ever think of that? So it's not a one-size-fits-all. Ultimately, the best thing you can do is to take a couple minutes, sit down, and look inwardly. How do I feel when I get impatient in those moments? Where do I feel that in my body? Do I react impulsively and respond emotionally? Do I shut down? Do I fire up? How does it affect me? And then how do I allow how it affected me to affect others, the others or those around me? Hopefully you caught that chain. How does it affect me? And how do I allow how it affected me to then affect others by how I reacted? Again, I hope that makes sense. Let it be a warning to you to be more vigilant, but also an encouragement to you to know that that does not automatically mean you are a broken person that needs to be thrown away. No, it never means that. It simply means, if it's causing constant friction, it simply means you have not moved yet into the realm of self-mastery or self-control. You'll never fully, 100%, without a shadow of a doubt, perfectly control yourself. But you can get towards self-mastery. You can move towards self-mastery and self-control procedurally, progressively, which then turns you from a liability, if that was the case, in your organization, in your family, in your friend group, to being an asset, an indispensable member. But even with all of that, I believe that God created all of us to be who we are. And not just be who we are, but to constantly grow and become who we are meant to be. So know that you are created with a purpose and that you are valuable and that you are cared for. Hear me when I say that you matter. With all your kinks, scratches, and bruises, you're beautiful and you matter. Just don't sit at who you are, okay? That's self-discovery. Join me in pursuing self-mastery. That's it for this episode. I hope it was a blessing to you. And don't just sit down here. Continue. There's like 3 more quotes for me to go through. So yeah, join me in the next episode where we talk more about focus in self-discovery. Okay? Thanks for listening. Hi friends, Jason here. I want to thank you again for your time investment of listening till the end. It seriously means a lot, and I would further appreciate knowing what you think about the show through either the like button or your own comments and DMs about what impacted you the most in this particular episode or in any other. The point is, I don't want you to be shy about taking the step to communicate all that. Lastly, I invite you to stay connected to this life-giving community by following or subscribing on whichever platform you prefer to watch or listen. You'll also find more nuggets of gold sprinkled here and there by looking up @JasonPF_TRU-U on all socials. Again, that's JASONPF_TRU-U. Let's learn to think, speak, and live as our true selves together.